the last words of Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi. The room was quiet, the air heavy. And in those final moments, the man who had ruled Kenya for 24 years, who had inspired loyalty and provoked fear in equal measure, whispered words that carried the weight of a lifetime. Kama kuna mtu nimekosea mnisamehe, kama kuna kitu nimesema kukumiza roho pia, naomba mnisamehe. If I have wronged anyone, forgive me. If I have spoken words that have hurt your heart, I ask for forgiveness. They were not the words of a president commanding power, nor of a teacher lecturing a class. They were the words of an old man at the twilight of his journey, stripped of titles, stripped of power, stripped of the armor of politics. They were words naked with vulnerability. Words born from the weight of memory, of mistakes, of regrets, and of the fragile hope that even in death, there could be forgiveness. The rise of a teacher. To understand the power of those last words, one must return to where the story began. Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi was not born in State House. He was not raised in palaces of privilege. He was born in 1924 in Sacho, a small village in Baringo. His father died when he was young, leaving him to be raised in hardship. He walked miles to school. He grew up with simplicity, with herding cattle, with the rhythms of rural Kenya. He became a teacher. And there is something poetic about that. Because teachers, unlike politicians, speak not in decrees but in lessons. They mold, they guide, they correct. And for Moi, teaching was more than a profession. It was a worldview. Even when he became president, he would often return to the language of teaching, guiding Kenyans as if they were pupils under his care. But teaching would not be enough. The winds of independence were sweeping across Africa. Kenya, like other nations, was preparing to shake off the chains of colonialism. And Moi, quiet but determined, stepped into politics. Moi was not the fiery orator like Tom Mboya. He was not the towering intellectual like Ojinga Odinga. He was not the charming lawyer like Mwai Kibaki. He was quiet, cautious, deliberate. That caution would define him. In 1978, when President Jomo Kenyatta died, Moi, then the vice president, ascended to power. Many thought he would be a transitional leader, a placeholder. Few believed he had the strength to hold the nation together. But Moi surprised them. He consolidated power. He built networks of loyalty. He leaned on the philosophy he called Nyayo, footsteps. He promised to walk in Kenyatta's footsteps, to preserve stability, to maintain unity, to keep the nation safe. For some, Nyayo was comforting. For others, it became the language of fear. The hand of iron. It did not take long before Moi revealed the other side of his leadership. Kenya in the 1980s and 1990s was a place where dissent was dangerous. Political opponents were silenced. Newspapers were censored. Universities were watched. And deep in the heart of Nairobi stood Nyayo House, its tall structure hiding torture chambers in its basement. Students, activists, and opposition figures were taken there. They emerged broken, if they emerged at all. For many, Nyayo House became the symbol of Moi's iron hand, a reminder that beneath the language of unity lay the machinery of repression. The name Robert Ouko still echoes with pain. Ouko, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, a man admired across the nation, was found murdered in 1990. His death shocked Kenya, ignited suspicion, and remains one of the darkest mysteries of Moi's rule. Many believed it was not an ordinary crime. It was political. It was brutal. It was a message. For every road that Moi built, there was a voice that was silenced. For every school that rose under his government, there was a student dragged into the darkness of Nyayo House. For every moment of unity, there were whispers of fear. The paradox of Moi. And yet, history is rarely painted in black and white. Moi was complex. He was the president who gave milk to schoolchildren, the famous Maziwa ya Nyayo. For a generation of Kenyans, that cup of milk was the symbol of care, of being seen. He built schools, expanded infrastructure, and kept Kenya from the civil wars that tore apart neighbors. But he was also the man accused of corruption, of cronyism, of enriching his circle while many sank deeper into poverty. He was the leader who spoke of peace and unity, but also the leader under whom tribal clashes scarred the Rift Valley, displacing thousands. He was the father of the nation to some and the oppressor to others. That is the paradox of Moi, the long goodbye. In 2002, after 24 years in power, Moi stepped down. The Constitution had changed. The era of one-party rule had ended. multi-party democracy had returned, and Moi, the teacher president, had to become the retired president. He left State House to a mixture of cheers and jeers. Some danced in the streets, celebrating the end of his rule. Others wept, fearing instability without his firm hand. Moi retreated to Kabarak, his home in the Rift Valley. There, away from the spotlight, he became an old man. He watched the country he once ruled move on. He saw leaders come and go. He saw the children who had once drunk maziwa ya Nyayo grow into adults who now criticized him. He saw his legacy debated, torn apart, defended, condemned. Time is the great equalizer. And in Kabarak, time finally came for Moi. The frailty of a giant. By the late 2010s, Moi was frail. The man who had once stood tall, waving his trademark ivory baton, was now wheelchair-bound, his voice softer, his body weaker. The teacher, the president, the strongman, all that remained was an old man waiting for the inevitable. It is in those moments of frailty that the mind turns inward. Titles no longer matter. Wealth no longer matters. What remains is memory, conscience, and the weight of choices. Moi had seen friends turn to enemies, and enemies turn to dust. He had seen ministers rise and fall. He had seen a nation change beyond recognition. But in his heart, there must have been questions. Had he done enough good to outweigh the pain? Would history remember him kindly? Would the people he ruled forgive him? And so on his deathbed he spoke. Kama kuna mtu nimekosea mnisamehe, kama kuna kitu nimesema kukumiza roho pia, naomba mnisamehe. The meaning of forgiveness. It was not a political speech. It was not a defense. It was not an argument. It was a plea. In those words was the acknowledgement of imperfection. Moi knew he had wronged many. He knew his words and actions had cut deep. He knew prisons, exile, torture, death. All these shadows clung to his name. But he also knew he had built, he had guided, he had given milk to children, he had kept a fragile nation from tearing itself apart. Forgiveness is never simple. It does not erase wounds. It does not resurrect the dead. It does not undo suffering. But forgiveness can be the beginning of healing. Moi's last words were not for the powerful. They were for ordinary Kenyans. For the mother whose son never came back from Nyayo House. For the widow of Robert Ouko. For the student exiled for daring to dream of democracy. For the farmer who lost land in tribal clashes. For the citizen who had once feared the knock on the door at midnight. To all of them, Moi whispered, "Forgive me." A nation listens. When those words became public, Kenyans reacted in different ways. Some wept. They heard the voice of an old man, stripped of pride, asking for mercy. They remembered the milk, the stability, the schools, the roads. They forgave. Others clenched their fists. They remembered the torture, the corruption, the fear. They asked, how do you forgive a man who never stood trial, who never admitted specifics, who never bore accountability? They refused. Forgiveness is not automatic. It is not owed. It is a gift given freely or withheld in pain. Moi's words opened the door, but each Kenyan had to decide whether to step through. Death of a president. On February 4th, 2020, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi breathed his last. Kenya awoke to the news with mixed emotions. The government declared a period of mourning. Flags flew at half-mast. State funerals were planned. Leaders from across the world sent messages. But in the homes of ordinary Kenyans, the conversations were different. Some remembered him as a father figure. Others as a dictator. Some told stories of school milk and songs of loyalty. Others told stories of screams from Nyayo House. Death does not simplify history. It complicates it. For in death, the man is gone, but the memory remains. And memory is not one thing, it is many. The final reflection. As we reflect on Moi's last words, we must hear them not just as history, but as humanity. Kama kuna mtu nimekosea mnisamehe, kama kuna kitu nimesema kukumiza roho pia, naomba mnisamehe. They are words every human could speak. For who among us has not heard another? Who among us has not spoken words that cut? Who among us, facing the silence of death, would not wish for forgiveness? Moi was a president, yes, but in his final breath, he was simply a man. A man asking his people, his family, his God, to forgive him. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson. Power fades. Titles fade. Wealth fades. What remains are the words you leave behind, the wounds you cause, and the courage to ask for mercy. Epilogue. The legacy of Moi. Today, years after his death, Kenya still debates Daniel Arap Moi. He is studied in classrooms, remembered in songs, argued over in politics. For some, he is the father of modern Kenya, who guided the nation through turbulent times. For others, he is the symbol of dictatorship, whose shadow still lingers. But in that quiet moment on his deathbed, all those debates disappeared. What remained was a frail man whispering, "Forgive me." Whether Kenyans will forgive, whether history will soften, is not for him to decide. It is for us. And perhaps that is the story of every leader, that no matter how high you rise, no matter how many statues are built, no matter how many roads bear your name, in the end, you will stand before your people, before your conscience, before your maker, and ask the same question, "Will you forgive me?" Moi asked. Kenya listened. History continues to answer.